In this lesson, we'll be doing mixed media and collage. That means we'll be using materials we haven't used before. We'll be using some stretch wrap, which is just like we use in the kitchen, and some wax paper. We'll be using some rice papers. We'll be using a lot of different kinds of ink. I also am going to be using a mixture of white glue. It's just Elmer's glue that I have mixed with water. I'll put some links in the description to help you find some of these items. I'll be showing you a number of different tricks and processes to see what sticks for you. This process will probably take longer, sometimes overnight, and that means that you'll put more investment into it, so I'm encouraging you, as always, to do a number of experiments instead of putting all of your energy and time into one precious piece of paper. One of the things I love about mixed media is that it's very spontaneous and some things happen on your paper that are unexpected, but that carries with it the other side, which is that it's out of your control more, it's riskier, and you might have more chances for a disaster. For this experiment, I'm going to work in the middle of my paper, and that's just because accidents are going to happen. I can just guarantee it. I'm thinking of a design that will help show you ways to use wax paper as well as clear wrap using ink. And we'll be overlapping some chunks of wax paper. I'm going to have that down in this area, and these will be sort of like cliffs, like rocky cliffs. At the top part of our design, I'm going to be doing some trees. So this is one of my favorite motifs, really. It's sort of rocks and trees, and I could spend my life thinking of different ways to play with them. But it will, I think, help show some tricks that you might really enjoy playing around with for further experiments with your paintings. To start with then, for this bottom area, I'm going to make some wax paper pieces. I just have torn them off from a roll of wax paper, and I tear them typically 2 or 3 inches wide first, and then I can tear those even more narrow. I've got now some straight edges and some jaggedy torn edges, and I think I'll tear them in half so they're a little more manageable. I'll tear these. And now I'm going to crumple my wax paper before your very eyes. And I crumpled it so that they're going to have some folds in it. And I did it in a way that make those folds be kind of long rather than going across. They're kind of going down these lengths of wax paper because I want the veins of my rocks to kind of do some vertical stuff. Okay. I'm going to set these wax paper pieces to the side so they're ready when we're at our crisis moment with our ink. What about these trees and what about our colors? So let's test some colors here and see what might be a nice spectrum for this painting or this ink collage. I'm going to get a little bit of water on my test sheet, and I'm going to take some yellow ink first and just make a puddle, nice dark yellow. I've got a blue that's a Prussian blue kind of ink, a dark blue ink, and I'm going to put this next to that yellow, and let's just see what happens. I make sure it kind of overlaps a little bit right there. And I'm getting a pretty nice, pretty beautiful and interesting green from this mix of the blue and yellow ink. That's going to be my tree color. I'm going to let yellow and blue bleed together to create these sort of tree shapes up here. So I think that will be fairly successful. Now down for the bottom area where there's these cliffs or rocks, let's throw some brown in and see what happens. I'm going to touch some water down here below, and I'll take some brown ink and touch that up, particularly into the blue, but see if we notice anything about that yellow as well. I mainly am looking to see if there's anything about it that doesn't look very nice to me. But I think that the red that's in the brown next to that Prussian, that's going to look pretty rich in terms of those rocks down at the bottom of the painting. So I think this little spectrum study will work out for us. I think that's going to work fine. Got the green trees above and those interesting rocks below. Okay, let's do it on some paper. I've stretched this paper, it's cold press, and I've stretched it so that it can handle a beating. We're going to probably be getting it wet and then drying it and getting it wet again a number of times in the process. So for these kinds of experimental techniques, I like to start with stretched paper. I don't think I need to do any kind of a preliminary sketch with pencil, but I want to remind you that we'll work in the middle area and then kind of just let the paint and ink do what it's going to do, and we can adjust things later. But right here is going to be our center of interest. We're going to have some cliffs and some trees right in here. Got my wax paper torn into chunks and ready to go. I'm going to start by kind of imagining where these will be on my watercolor paper here. I'm going to have those cracks, folded pieces of wax paper be mostly running downward, kind of giving me some nice verticals and veins in those rocks. These are pretty big. Now that I see what they look like on this paper, I want to cut them down a little bit. Now, I'm going to do the brown and blue for this lower area, and we'll see what happens when I put the wax paper on it. I'm going to leave my paper dry right here for right now. Maybe I could, I'll put a little bit of water, but not very much, maybe a few strokes of clean water, just to provide a little bit of uncertainty to this effort. And I'm going to drip some ink on here, some of that Prussian, and I'm going to put some brown on here. Just drip that in there. Put my inks onto some lid covers, just some old throwaway yogurt container type of lids, so that I can see what happens with these inks and I can have quick access to them. I'm not trying to make anything beautiful. I'm just throwing some ink down, but now I'm going to take this wax paper and put it over the top. And again, I'll do little pieces, some straight edges and some torn edges. I'm going to get some water under that area. I can always mist a little bit on this so that I have a little more flow when I watch what happens to that ink. I'm pressing these folded pieces of wax paper down into that ink. Maybe we can throw a little bit more of that Prussian over where this brown is runny and give it a little mist. And give it some wax paper. These little folds, you can see that the ink likes to find little pathways through those folds and cracks, and it creates darker and lighter spots of ink. And that's what's going to look interesting later on. Okay, for our top part where these trees are going to be blooming, I'm going to want to put some water, and I'm going to be putting some clear wrap over it once I get the ink on there. So I just take some clear wrap, and I'm going to tear a piece of it that's at least the size of my paper. I'm going to go past the edges of my paper and takes that clear wrap and make sure I'm all set. Yeah, that should be fine. I'm going to mist this whole top area so that there's definitely some moisture that will help the ink run once I put the clear wrap on there. And then I'm going to put some yellow up in this top area, even on top of this wax paper here. Let's get some yellow along there. And maybe even more yellow. And squirt some right out of the bottle onto there. And I've got a little bit of a gap, I think, below the wax paper there. And now, just when I put this blue on, I'm going to actually put the blue on top of the wax paper so that when it runs off of it up into the yellow, it will create those tree shapes. So I'm taking my clear wrap now and I'm pulling it so that the wrinkles in the paper are vertical. And I'm going to take this and lay it down on the paper, but I'm pulling vertical wrinkles in the clear wrap. I'm stretching it out so that it creates these long wrinkles that go up into that yellow ink. And it's going to take some of that blue and carry it upwards. I think I need to tip my board and let some of that blue run. It finds its way because it likes to find those little wrinkles in the clear wrap, and I'll just let that kind of flow upwards. I can manipulate this still a while it's wet, but this I'm going to need to let dry for overnight is best, but let's just let this dry for a bit and we'll come back and take a look. If you got overnight, that's awesome. So come back and see what it created when you're done. I'm going to take another piece of clear wrap before I put this over to dry, and just kind of catch this end over here and see if we can get a couple of wrinkles in that will add an interesting vertical to this spot over here on the left side of our position. I like how that brown's coming up into the yellow and making kind of a nice interesting red. I'm just using my finger to do a little bit of manipulation, and it's happening because of the wrinkles of the clear wrap. Pull this a little tighter. Okay, I think I've messed around enough. I'm going to let this go and just let it dry. Let's see what happens. Okay, now the first part is dry, and it's time for us to start gluing on our rice paper. I've let this dry now for more than 6 hours, and I'm ready to take this clear wrap off the top and see what we have created. So now the only thing left on here is my wax paper, and then where those inks have created patterns. I can see some really strong verticals, and I did that deliberately by stretching those wrinkles in the clear wrap, and the way that the ink would follow those wrinkles creates some interesting line work in my composition here. So I'm tossing away that clear wrap. It doesn't really work a second time, but I'm going to carefully peel off all this wax paper now. And remember, we had wrinkled that up. So the wrinkles are going to leave kind of a pattern inside in the ink. Let's see what happens. Never really know what to expect with this. Sometimes you need to kind of nudge it with a palette knife or a matte knife, get up under the edge so that you can pull that wax paper all the way off. And now we need to sort of step back and use our imagination. My original concept was to have some trees up here and there's some cliffs right here. I notice how the yellow has made sort of a triangular mound of, let's say, possibly some fall shrubbery and bushes that are at the tops of those cliffs before the trees. Let's see what we can do with this here. I want you to start to play with painting on top of your ink, and you're going to notice that it resists a little bit, especially if there's some really shiny parts that where it was really thick. That's going to push your paint away. Well, let's get I want to use a bigger brush than that. I'm going to use like a number 8 round, nice point on this brush, and I'm going to start a light green. I'll start lighter and move darker. So I'm going to use some olive green mixed with some medium yellow and some raw sienna. That raw sienna really helps my olive green look more earthy and more natural and more real, more like it really does in nature. If I just use these verticals as my guide and I come up here and start to throw a few branches of trees up here, some of it's kind of pushing away my pigment. It's pretty interesting. I'm going to have it darker before it really sticks. Let's put a tree right here. Now in nature, I don't think I would have that perfect little kind of peak right there in that yellow, so I'll probably need to try to get some darker pigment over that. Okay, that's our lightest green. Let's get darker. We're going to add a little bit of sap green to that and some more of that raw sienna, and let's see how this looks. Yeah, there we go. Now I can start to see these branches a little bit better. And I'm going to feed off of my blue. That gives me some interesting value changes and color changes as I move across. If I use this Prussian mixture here with some sap green in it and have that run into my lighter green branches, we might get some pretty interesting effects going. Okay, and let's really get some dark stuff. I'm going to get some sepia and some indigo and create a real dark, and that's going to be the base of these trees up in the forest. And let's see if I can make that autumn bush stuff look, that yellowed stuff look a little more in a shape that might actually be realistic. I was looking at the top of that yellow, so that is supposed to be the top of some shrubs. I was just trying to channel shrubbery in my brain while I did that. And now I'm going to just hit some more of this Prussian dark stuff in here. This is so strong, that green ink underneath, that I pretty much have to have some indigo and some Prussian blue to really tell you that there's a tree here. Otherwise, the ink is just going to be completely taking over. It does definitely look like a trunk where that one wrinkle kind of left it. So I'll play off of that. It's fine. We'll put some nice dark down there. I love the way this brown ran into the yellow right here, and I just am going to leave that. That's the sort of surprises and kind of serendipity that you can get with this experimental method. I'm going to mist this now just to let that bleed together a little bit. And I can see so much blue in this part. I think I'm going to accentuate that, maybe even use cobalt on it a little bit with some viridian. And let's see how we can do with turquoise stuff going over here. I do like that yellow. I'm going to leave that. And you're totally in charge of this. You can just make this do whatever you want. I actually might put a little bit of sky coming in through here. Let's bring some sky down. Needed some clean water on it. And just let that bleed down in here a little bit. Run some of that over this direction. Then when I put my tree in, it will tell people I can see the sky behind these trees. I'm going to keep a soft edge on that though. I just want this to look a little bit like an experiment. It's just fun. It's just playing around. And I'll frame in my trees with that turquoise. I'm going to stick a turquoise one over here. Some of what I'm thinking about is just patterns. Patterns of color, patterns of shape, and patterns of value, dark and light. So here, I'm going to need some super dark. And here we'll just get one final sort of tree kind of shape going, so at least it stays sort of consistent as we move left to right. Now, we've got this bottom part with these rocky cliffs, and they are not exactly what I was hoping for, so you never know, you really don't. But what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to try another mixed media technique, and that is to glue some other papers on top of these. These are super strong inks. I can't really tell you any more about this. I can't go and lighten this up at all. It's just dark. And if I start painting some darkness on here, this is just going to be one big dark blob. So this is a time when I think about collaging some rice paper onto my painting. Rice paper is a beautiful collage element if you can kind of overlap it. So let's take some of our glue mix. This is the 50/50 Elmer's school, I'm sorry, not school glue, but glue all. And I'm going to take my mix of that and use a bristle brush. This is not my best brush, not my favorite brush. It's just a bristle brush that's got synthetic bristles, and I'm dipping it in my 50% glue and water solution, and I'm going to just collage these like they're some of the cliffs. I'll grab some of that white part. I do love some of the texture that happened right over here, so I'm going to leave that, but I'm going to cover this part with some rice paper. I've glued underneath. I put glue right on the paper. I lay down a piece of rice paper, and I put glue over the top of it. Now, this is very gluey, so we're going to let this dry for a long time. We're going to let this dry overnight. But I go over all the piece of rice paper, and I'm kind of pressing down as I let the glue mixture soak into that paper. It's completely soaked in, and I've pressed all the fibers down by just gentle tapping with this synthetic bristles of my brush. There's different colors of rice paper. I'm going to put a narrow band of this brown. Let's see what that does. I'll go all the way up into my yellow, and I can decide as I go, maybe tear some off because I don't need it I want to have variety. That's what's really keeping my eyes focused, my brain focused. I'm going to take a different kind of that light rice paper. This has a much thinner fibers in it, so it'll look a little bit more soft. And I'm going to leave some of that dark blue. I'll make sort of an angle here. And if I put the glue all over the top and let it soak down in, it'll press this to the paper. So you glue on the paper underneath the rice paper, and you glue over the top of it afterwards. Now I'm overlapping, so I'm going to take some of this brown one and carry it across over that way. Cover up some of that white spot where no ink flowed. And I'll get some more of this super texture stuff. It looks like it's got chunks of grass in it or something. And let's just do a little spot up here on this white part. Paint glue under it and then glue over it. And I'm not afraid to use a lot of glue. I'm tapping it on there since I know I'm going to leave it overnight. I keep altering. That's what's going to give me variety. So I switch papers and I switch sizes. So those are my two variables I can play with a little bit. Okay, I'll put some down here at the base of that rock. I'm thinking of, in Oregon, there are these basalt cliffs in the center part of Oregon, the central area of Oregon. There's basalt cliffs that are, the way they geologically break and get jointed, and when the basalt cooled, when the lava cooled, creates joints that make these beautiful kind of vertical lines in the cliffs. I'm sort of channeling that a little bit here maybe. Let's leave some of that beautiful blue right there. But I'm overlapping again so that I have multiple textures, multiple colors, different shapes. Let's see, even right in the middle of this one so that it's not just that one soft kind of fiber, but one that has a little bit more texture in it. Okay, and I think I will carry this out without, just off to the side, without covering up that nice flow that where the brown flowed into the yellow. But that'll give me a little bit of a line, soft edge over on the edge of this design that I've made here with rice paper. Okay, and then we can maybe do this same thing. Let's see some of this color. This will give us a passageway that hooks over to our edges a little bit here. Same thing over here. Glue under, glue over. Overlap, alternate textures. And I'll go all the way to the edge of the paper just because I don't really know yet what's it's gonna do tomorrow to my imagination, what's gonna happen here. And of course, it's fine to go off the paper. That will be covered up by your mat when you frame this up and send it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I sometimes have a piece that goes halfway over another piece, and that way I'll have a switch of texture right in the middle. Okay, we're going to let this dry overnight and see what we can make of it in the morning. Rinse out your brush. Don't leave glue in those bristles. Well, good morning. This has been drying overnight, and now I can tell it's super dry. The places where I have glued rice paper are real flat. Remember, putting that glue on top of the rice paper is what's going to help you get that sealed down nice and flat. I'm going to now just play a game with this. It's basically a design game, and I'm going to put a mat over it to help myself kind of think about this pattern of color and shape that I have on this rectangular piece of paper. And this is up to the artist. Right now, we're going to enter a play zone where we just play around, and I'm going to just sort of think out loud while I do that. And it's not to say that my way of handling this situation is the only way, but it is my way. And so I hope it gives you some ideas of how to tackle a design problem like this. Remembering our rules about, or our suggestions, not rules, but about values and about variety. We want as much variety as we can, because that's what's going to make our viewers look at this and say, ooh, cool, look at this. So I'm going to try to be thinking about that as I work. First, some of the things that I notice is the darks and lights, and I have a triangle of darkness right here, which is fine. I think that works pretty well. These trees feel pretty nebulous to me. It's partly because there's ink involved. It's not crisp, let's put it that way. There's no crisp edges up here. There's no variety of edges except for some of these places where the ink ran up the wrinkles in the clear wrap. So I want to add some more crispness up here, some more hard edges rather than just all soft edges. Color-wise, I feel like the pattern of yellow and these browns and the blue, they're pretty well distributed. They kind of have some movement. There's some definite rhythm to the way these shapes of rocks are and the verticals in these trees. I think one thing that'll help tie it together a bit is that these big blotches of white space where no ink got to the paper, I'm going to fill those with some color. I think I'm going to use quinacridine gold, which is a more unusual color that we haven't used that much, but it's beautiful. It's reddish, rusty brown, and I think it'll add a richness that'll tie this brown rice paper to the brown ink and some of that yellow ink and the way that brown bled in there. Let's practice just by bringing it in right here and see how that looks. I want you to take a close look at what happens where I've painted over rice paper. It absorbs it in different ways. The different pieces are going to act differently. One reason it bled all the way down into this other one is because I had it pretty wet. So I'm going to take my paper towel and just blot there to see if I can make a little more variety of how that got absorbed by the rice paper. I can take some clean water now and use my synthetic fibered brush and just kind of dance it around a bit and soak out a little bit of that pigment. I like the mottled effect that I've got, but it's a reminder that as we paint now, these rice papers absorb water and pigment faster than our watercolor paper. They are like super sponge-like, and they can wick up that water and run that water all the way across that whole piece of rice paper really quickly. So in order to avoid that or to control it better, after I load up my brush from that puddle, I'm going to hold a paper towel under the ferrule, just like we've done in the past when we want to wick a lot of the water out of those bristles. I'm not touching my paper towel to that tip of the brush bristles. I want those to still hold the paint, but just not so much water behind it. Let's get some of that quinacridine over here, and look how it creates some interesting, I can maybe make a little rock of a part of my cliff right there, and I'll carry this off the side. Okay, just playing around, but I had more control here because I didn't have as much water in my brush. And I'll get a little bit more yellow into this part at the top to help tie that together with the yellow ink that was previously there. Okay, I'm leaving lots of up to chance because the way that this rice paper absorbs pigment is varied. We don't have total control over it. Okay, a little bit more quinacridine up in this white area, and again, I'm going to soak the water out into my paper towel before I touch into this spot here. Okay, and maybe a little bit down here. I'm going to overlap a little bit, help kind of create a different pattern in there. I'm thinking a little bit about those shapes of the cliffs that I was remembering in Oregon, and the jointing process of that basalt is really vertical. It's got a lot of geologic splits in that rock that are vertical, and so that's one of the ideas or looks that I'm kind of going for here. What happens if we use a little touch of blue or even turquoise? Yeah, we used a little bit of turquoise up above, and I think this will help kind of tie it together a little bit. I'm going to take some cobalt turquoise. Actually, let me get pretty cleaned out of that quinacridone gold and get into that turquoise, get a nice loaded brush of that, but I'm going to, again, wick out all that extra water, and let's just see what happens if I touch this in here. Kind of making a transition between the deep, dark Prussian blue, and where these fibers hang over this blue column of the cliff, I'm going to just touch a little bit of turquoise onto those fibers, maybe carry that line all the way down. You're just creating a pattern. You're creating a design of color, texture, shape, and you're having some fun. This is where I'm hoping that you're relaxing a little bit. You got some music on in your little painting spot, and you're going into your own little zone with this. I'm gonna wick out some more and try a little more quinacridone right here. Just a nice punch of pretty intense pigment, because I'm sort of creating a dance. You want to think of it as a dance of color that kind of moves its way, takes a path that kind of diagonals down through here. A little bit of connection up here might help, and I think maybe I'll use some yellow. I do have rice paper under here, and that'll absorb this in different ways, but I think that'll help kind of make my little color dance move diagonally down through here. Put a little bit over here. So do you see how I'm playing with that? It's completely a personal thing. It's not about that there's a right way or a wrong way. I'm just trying to create some designs and patterns that work well in my brain, and I'm hoping that if I think about variety, I think about the variety of shapes and edges and colors, that it's going to be interesting to my viewer as well. Okay, I'm going to kind of let that go now. I hope that you experiment with rice paper and recognize that you lose a lot of control, because it's not the same as putting your paint onto watercolor paper. It really takes off sometimes, and it bleeds and runs along the fibers of that very thin rice paper real easily. Okay, I am going to go back up here and address the fact that there's no hard edges up here that help define these trees. And one thing that you are dealing with up here is that you used ink to create these initial trees, and ink repels watercolor to some extent. And so that's one of my problems, is that I'm now trying to paint over the trees with watercolor, and it doesn't necessarily take. It can push that pigment away. But if I take some of that Prussian watercolor paint and mix it with some sepia, I think I'll be able to, this will be a dark enough mix, especially if I throw some indigo in there. This will be a dark enough mix that I should be able to get a pretty strong tree. Let's try this central one right here. I've already painted it once, and I won't necessarily just go straight over what I painted before. That'll create a little bit more variety in my paint colors, because I'm going now over that, at least in some parts of it. Okay, I'm going to hit this with some Prussian again. Still getting more darkness. That's what I'm going for. And I can kind of have that tree reach over in front of the other one. Okay, now I'll use a little bit of my rigger to throw a little bit of grass-like shapes in down here. And, interesting. Let's just see how that dries for a minute, and then we can decide what we need to do to continue defining those trees with a little more crispness and some hard edges. Okay, one idea that I thought might help is I'm going to go back and take that same Prussian blue Liquitex ink that I created this with originally yesterday, and I'm going to use it to try painting the tree. It's kind of the fight fire with fire sort of strategy. If I put ink over ink, maybe this will actually be able to take a little bit better. I'm going to use my rigger right in this ink. It's fine. I'm not contaminating the ink at all, because my brush is cleaned out with clean water. And I'll be sure and rinse this brush immediately after I do it, because I don't want to have ink dry in these bristles. So let's touch into this tree with Prussian blue ink that is exactly the same ink as that that I put down in the rest of this design. Okay, now you're going to have to decide how much of the patterning from the plastic wrap you want to leave in here. I'm going to save that little bit of trunk that sort of magically appeared because of the wrinkle that was in the plastic wrap. That's totally a personal decision that you're going to make as part of your playing around stuff here. Okay, and I think I'm going to just have a little bit more Prussian up here coming into that other Prussian. This Prussian that is in the background is diluted some. Remember, I misted my paper a little bit up there before I let it run underneath the clear wrap. So that's part of why I've got a variety now of Prussian blue, because some of it was runny underneath clear wrap and some of it's direct right out of the jar. So I've got some variety involved there. Now it's just kind of looking for balance. Let's see. I like that nice dark stuff down there. You can do a little negative painting, just create some patterns, really. I'm not trying to make this look like anything necessarily perfect. This will suggest a tree, this bloom of ink back in there, but it doesn't necessarily, that's up to my viewer to figure out what's going on. Okay, now I'm going to take another look at it. Sometimes it helps, again, to put that mat over because it isolates your thinking a little bit. It forces you to think of this not as the cliffs in Oregon or whatever, but as a pattern of color on paper. In other words, you're an artist who's thinking about it as a painting, not as a photograph, or trying to make sure that people realize what you're telling them about nature. And so I'm looking at patterns and deciding, I'm making decisions. I see some lines in these cliffs that I could continue up a little bit with my rigger or possibly even an ink pen. I can leave these corners, and that makes this sort of a vignette, really. You can see that my composition is sort of a cruciform. It's got a band of horizontal and it's got a band of vertical, and I've left these corners without much. And so that's creating a certain kind of vignette type painting, which is sort of interesting. So you decide as you look at it, how does it feel to you? How is it balanced? I feel a little bit like my dark vertical band could, it's right in here. I sort of, for some reason in my brain, I kind of would like this to have a little more dark so that it sort of leads people almost like you're reading this left to right. You'd be moving across like that. So this is the area I think I might get a little bit more dark, and I think I might define these cliffs just a little bit better. Again, I'm going to use my rigger this time because I have a little bit more control, and I'm going to get some of my dark pigment of watercolor rather than using that blue ink, and I'm going to wipe off my brush on my paper towel a little bit. I just pull it down. You can also do just a few tests so that you know that you're not, too dark or too much water. And then I think I'm going to just find these patterns over here just a little bit. So this is partially abstract is what it really is. And so you're the one that has to decide how abstract do you want it to be. And your viewer will have to deal with it whatever you do. So that's their job. I think my strategy is that there'll be some more detail in the center part, and then out in here, these are still suggestions of kind of that those rectangular shapes, but I'm not wedded to making them look exactly like rocks. And I can control some how much those wick out into the rice paper by touching it with clean water, touching it with a paper towel. You can make it darker or lighter, okay? So let's see about this darkness back here. I think if I take some of my darkest pigment, lean towards that Prussian blue, which is what sort of ties this painting together, is I'll just put let's see. I think I can put an area of darkness and maybe actually negatively paint around this tree that we already have there. Again, I'm using my rigger, so I have some control about this, but I want this to be sort of a tree shape that leads up into this corner a little bit. Let's tuck it in here a little bit. And out in here, I want to just obscure it. So I think I'm going to just hit my mister on that and let it get speckly and not so perfect, or you won't be able to just see all my little brush strokes. Be a little more mysterious. I'm going to touch a little more pigment into here. Okay, and then where this goes out to the edge, I'm going to use some of that turquoise and just go. I know there's a piece of rice paper here, so this is going to create a difference just by putting a stroke straight across one time. You're going to see a difference between watercolor paper up at the top and where the touched rice paper, and that'll give a little bit of variety to that blue. I'm going to carry that through the painting a little bit. This is just tricks to help kind of tie this painting together. And I'm going to follow this line, that nice diagonal, with a stroke of that turquoise up at the top, and then just use clean water and let that drift over to the side here. So I'm obscuring where that line begins and where it ends, so it's not too rigorous. Maybe even just a little bit of vagueness right there would be fine too. Just looking again for interest, balance, variety. I'm trying to have this painting just seem like a pretty cool pattern of color. You also can control some. If your mat's a little smaller than your painting, you can control what part of it people get to see. This tree here is not my favorite. It happened because of the clear wrap, that it's got this big triangular trunk. And I think since these are a little more narrowly defined, I think I'm going to play with that a little bit. And let's see, I'm not sure what would happen with quinacridine gold next to this brown, if that will work, and I'll help define that trunk a little bit differently and get some of that over in here. This is really the sweet spot of the painting, is this in a sense, it's my demarcation between rocks and forest. So that's where I've intensified the shapes, I've intensified the colors, and I'm now just using clean water to let that top edge of that quinacridine bleed out up into the forest a little bit. And I think in order to help tie this together, I'll do the same over here. Maybe I'll stop when I get to that line of verticality. Okay, this tree again, I'm going to define that a little bit more, and maybe I'm going to try using the ink itself, the Prussian blue ink, and we'll just define it a little more crisply up in here. It's putting Prussian blue right over that green, but I think that'll work. Okay, and remember that one little trick that sometimes dead trees can bring life to your painting. I'm going to just stick a straight vertical line right here, and maybe one right here. Let's put an odd number of them in. Those are kind of a cluster. I'm going to stick one right through here. You get to decide, does it go over that tree or under it? Again, I'm breaking it up rather than barreling right all straight down. I make it intermittent because our view tends to be obscured when we look through a bunch of trees, right? Okay, it's time for you to make a decision. Are you done with your painting yet or not? And I'm going to kind of let this one rest now, and I might come back and look at it in a few days and decide at that point if it feels like there's no glaring spots that feel uncomfortable to me or make me wish I could touch back into it. Have fun and use this as a chance to just play. Well, there we have it, a mixed media collage. I have to say at this point, please don't get frustrated by this process. There's a lot of ways that it can get messed up. If you find that there's an area of your painting that's less successful or that you're not too happy with, grab some more rice paper, grab your glue, cover that area, and give it another try. Finally, I should say that the possibilities are limitless. Even just in looking at inks and playing with inks, there are so many different kinds now that have fluorescent colors or sparkly stuff that's embedded in the ink. So I hope you'll have a lot of fun with mixed media and take some chances, take some risks, and have some fun playing with it. I hope it has loosened you up a bit so that you don't feel like you have to be pure, transparent watercolor in everything that you do. You don't have to be perfect, just let it go. We'll learn a lot more about that in our next lesson. Hi, I'm Bob. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll go by my website at watercolorwithbob.com. That's where you'll find an interactive outline of the whole course. You can also share your work with me and your fellow students. One thing I really love about watercolor is how accessible it is. That's why I realized it was important to me to put this course out for free. That said, it would mean the world to me if you would support this work. You can like it, you could share it with your friends, you could subscribe to the channel, you could also visit the gift shop or even make a donation. Thanks so much. See you on the next lesson, and happy painting. Oh, did you mess that up? Oh, that's okay.